afternoon Year 2, welcome to your first topic lesson of the week. Today in topic we are going to be focusing on geography and history, and we are going to be learning all about Tudor style buildings, and later on we are going to be labelling a Tudor style house. So a Tudor style building were houses that were built in the 17th century, and at the moment we are learning all about the Great Fire of London in 1666. And they were the types of buildings that would have been there in the fire and that would have got burnt down. So, the first part we are going to look at is something called a human feature. Now, with your grown-up, can you talk about what you think a human feature is? Well done if you said a human feature is something built by people. So, we are going to quickly write down a few ideas that we might have. So, I know that a city would have been built by people, so lots of different buildings, just like in the city of London. I also know that factories is a human feature. Schools are a human feature. Ports is a human feature because they would have been built by humans. So, we are going to think about the city of London today. And in the city of London, we are going to be focusing on the types of buildings that would have been there in 1666 during the Great Fire of London. So, let's have a little think about what the houses were like in London in 1666. So I'm going to think back of all the learning that I have done over the last couple of weeks, and I know that the houses in London during the Great Fire of London, they were built very close together. And we know that was one of the main reasons why the fire spread so quickly, was because they were built so close together. I also know that the houses were made out of wood. And wood is a very flammable material, and that is how all the houses caught on fire so quickly. I know that the roof of these houses or buildings were made of either thatch or straw. And again, that was another reason why the houses caught on fire so quickly and they burnt down so quickly. The houses were often built quite tall, and I know that the houses were built close together and that made the streets very narrow. So that, children, is the information that I already know about the houses in London during the Great Fire. So now we are going to learn some key features about those houses. So the types of houses and buildings that were in 1666 were Tudor buildings. Can you say Tudor? And our learning objective today is that we are going to be looking at the key features of a Tudor house. And we know from our learning before, children, that a house is a human feature. So that means it was built by people. So the first key feature we are going to look at is something called wattle and daub. Can you say that, children? And so these buildings were made of a wooden frame, and the gaps were filled in with woven twigs, and that was the wattle. So that's this bit, the woven twigs, the wattle. And over the top of the wattle was smeared dung. Does anybody, children, tell your grown-ups, what do you think dung is? Well done, that is animal poo. Ew, very smelly. So what they used to do is over the gaps they would smear the dung, and that's called daub, and they would smear that over the top, and we can see the daub here. So that was the job of the wattle and daub. The next part of a Tudor style house is that it was built of a wooden frame. And they would build that wooden frame using something called wooden beams. So these are all the wooden beams that you can see that made the house. Now, when the people were building these houses, they didn't have fancy machinery to cut the beams to the right sizes. They would have to do that by hand. So that means sometimes they were quite uneven because they didn't have a fancy machine like we would use today. So that is the wooden frame. The next part is something called black timber. Now, over the wooden frame, it would often be covered in something called black tar, which is these bits here. And that is a black, thick, sticky substance that would go hard and it would stop the wooden frame from rotting. They would also have steep roofs. So we can see that both of these Tudor style houses have steep roofs. And they were either made from clay tiles, which we can see here, or thatch. Now, we might still see thatch roofs on cottages. Okay, so the next part of a Tudor house is something called a jetty. So the upper floors, that means the upstairs, would often stick out a little bit further than the downstairs. So that is called the jetty. So it's this part here that sticks out further than the downstairs. Tudor buildings used to always have tiny panes of glass. Now, the reason that they used to have tiny panes of glass rather than having one big pane of glass is because that to make one big piece of glass, it was very expensive. So to save money and cost, they would make their panes of glass a lot smaller. So instead of having one pane of glass here, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 panes of glass. So they used to use tiny panes rather than one big pane of glass. So children, we have learnt lots of different features of a Tudor building. Let's go through the key words together. Wattle and daub, timber, wooden frame, steep roof, jetty, tiny panes of glass. Let's now, children, have a look at this house here. Now, Miss Billy is asking you a question. Is this house an old house or is it a new style house? And I want you to just either pause the video or discuss with your grown-up what materials and what can you see that gives you a clue for old or new? Okay, children, so this is a new style house because the main clue that I could see is that it is made out of brick. And we know that after the Great Fire of London, they decided that brick was a much stronger material and would less likely burn down if there was another fire. So let's just have a look at this one. So, can you now decide if this house is old or new? Well done if you said it was an old house. Let's talk about some things that tell us why it's an old house. So, it has got a steep clay tiled roof. I can see a jetty, so the upstairs is sticking out further than downstairs. I can see that there are tiny panes of glass, and I can also see that black timber, the tar that would stop the wooden frame from rotting. Well done, children. So now you should be really confident at naming the features of a Tudor building, and we're now going to look at our activity for this afternoon. So for our activity this afternoon, children, we have got to label this Tudor house. So as you can see, we have got some missing words to our sentences, and we've got arrows pointing to the different parts of the Tudor house. So we have got to use our key words that we learnt from the PowerPoint. So we've got wattle and daub, jetty, black timber, tiny panes of glass, steep roof, and a wooden frame. So these words fit somewhere on here. So you've got to read the first part of the sentence and decide which one it is describing, which one it is talking about. And you've also got to look at where the line, the arrow is pointing to. So I'm going to do this one with you, and then you are going to do the rest all by yourself. So let's have a look at the first one. So I've got a missing word, something to stop the wood rotting. And it's pointing to these black bits here. Now, I can remember, let me look at my keywords. I can remember that was the job of the black timber, because that was the black tar that they put over the wooden frame. So in this gap here, I'm going to write black timber. Okay, I'm going to read my sentence. Black timber to stop the wood rotting. And I'm really confident that is the right one because I can see it is pointing to the black timber on the Tudor house. So children, using these key words to help you, so I've already used black timber, you have got to use the rest of these key words and you have got to fit them and make the sentence correct, making sure you are really looking at where the arrow is pointing. Don't forget, children, to email your work to your class teacher when you've done, and we can't wait to see your Tudor house. Bye for now.